Welcome to MOT in Conversation with Alexa Smith, Tazewell Thompson, and Wayne S. Brown. This roundtable will look toward the future of opera and pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts, and how institutions create the systems and structures to support and encourage Black engagement and representation on stage and off. Alexa Smith is the Chief of Staff and Assistant Vice President for Special Initiatives at Manhattan School of Music. In this role, she oversees special projects for the Office of the President and leads the Cultural Inclusion Initiative as a part of MSM's strategic plan. Under that initiative, Smith leads workshops and training for students, faculty, and staff on a variety of topics, including equity and inclusion on stage and off stage, analyzing problematic repertoire in the classical canon, and changing the colorblind narrative. She is a member of the Sphinx Lead Program, a professional empowerment program designed to evolve the landscape of arts leadership. Smith has been a guest speaker and teaching artist for Project 440, a nonprofit preparing young musicians to use their musical gifts to transform lives and transform communities. She is a native of Louisville, Kentucky, and resides in Harlem. The internationally acclaimed opera and theater director, playwright, librettist, actor, and educator Tazewell Thompson is the director of opera studies at the Manhattan School of Music. Thompson has more than 150 directing credits, including 30 world and American premieres in major opera houses and theaters across the US, Europe, Africa, Japan, and Canada, including such prestigious opera stages as Glimmerglass, New York City Opera, Teatro Real, La Scala, l'Opéra Bastille, and San Francisco Opera. His opera, Blue, written with composer Janine Tesori, won the 2020 Mikana Award for Best New Opera in North America, and the New York Times named Blue on its list of Best in Classical Music of 2019. Thompson's production of Porgy and Bess, broadcast on PBS live from Lincoln Center, received Emmy Award nominations in the categories of Best Director and Best Production. Wayne S. Brown was named President and CEO of Michigan Opera Theater in 2014, following his tenure as Director of Music and Opera for the National Endowment for the Arts. Prior to his affiliation with the Arts Endowment, Brown served as producer of music programs for the Cultural Olympiad in Atlanta, where he managed music events associated with the 1996 Olympic Games. Brown has been a long history of involvement with symphony orchestras in Louisville, Kentucky, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Detroit. He was a founding member of the Magic in Music Advisory Committee for John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, has served on advisory boards for the Mellon and Ford Foundations, is a former vice chairman of the American Symphony Orchestra League, previously served as a member of the American Arts Alliance Board, and is presently vice chair of Opera America Board of Directors. Brown began his career with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, where he was instrumental in bringing about the first classical roots concert in Detroit in 1979, an initiative that is now celebrated by several communities throughout the nation. I am overjoyed to be joined by this panel, this distinguished panel, Alexa Smith, Tazewell Thompson, and Wayne Brown. Thank you so much for being here. Now, the issue of achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts is certainly not a new one. However, with some of the events of the past year, I would say a greater light has been shown on the issue throughout our society as a whole. And the profit and nonprofit world have been stepping up to respond. And so I'm very excited to speak with the three of you as we look toward the future of opera in pursuing DEI in the arts. How do institutions create systems and structures to support and encourage Black engagement and representation on and off the stage? I think I will turn to Alexa first. If I may ask, how does your work help to change the current systems, structures, and practices which may stand in the way of achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts and in our community at large?
Sure. So in my role, I'm the Chief of Staff and Assistant Vice President for Special Initiatives at Manhattan School of Music. And that is a long title that catches a lot of different things. So I created and oversee our cultural inclusion initiative, which is a 5-year plan to hit a lot of different pieces of the school in different ways. I think what we did here that worked for us, and I think you really need to understand your own institution to understand how your people work, what they respond to best. So we felt that it wouldn't be effective to bring in a new chief diversity officer for our ecosystem. We wanted to like lay a foundation first. So everyone had common language, or we're used to being in spaces where they're talking about things that make them uncomfortable. So that when maybe down the road, when we do want to have that role here, they'll be ready. They won't be swimming upstream. You know, they'll have people that are ready to support them. They'll have common knowledge, common goals, and that I believe will help someone succeed. And I think what we did this year was we focused on Blackness. We centered Blackness. We created a roster of artist scholars that really helped us get a little deeper into things like repertoire. We had someone come in to do a seminar on Confederate nostalgia and minstrelsy as that relates to all areas of the school, classical, jazz, and musical theater. But I think really all of that comes from knowing what our institution does. And I am actually an alum of the school. So for me, I think I was a good person to reflect on my own experiences here, bring them to senior leadership where I'm sitting at the table, and talk through what we can do now and what we need to work on that may take a little longer time.
Wow. I turn to Tazewell now. Can you chime in? Of course, obviously, your fantastic opera Blue certainly has been changing structure and form. Tell us a little bit about your work in regards to this.
I would say that this is an ongoing struggle that has no shelf life, no expiration date. This issue will unfortunately be with us forever. Now, there has been great strides, especially at the expense and the sacrifice of lives lost, George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and lives prior to that have not been so publicly noticed or written about. But more than, I was thinking about how long I've been doing this, and it's close to 40 years. And for too long, it's been, you're the first to do this. You're the first in the room to do that. You're the first to have the title of this. You're the first to write this. You're the first to ever direct this. You're the first, but in terms of a person of color. And I think that while there has been tremendous strides, here you have Wayne Brown at Michigan Opera Theater, you have me now at Manhattan School of Music, along with Alexa. Think about all of the opera companies and all the theater companies across the country, small, large, middle, in between. There's still work to do. Who's involved in those boards? Who's involved with the decision-making? Who does the hiring? Who chooses the repertoire? What will the repertoire be like? What is your community like? And if you choose certain operas or plays to be on your stages, will that alienate, or will that bring in an audience that is unused to having those stories told? I feel now that probably in every segment of this country, there is a wonderful theater. There's a wonderful opera house, a small one, a community opera house, a major opera company. So audiences want to come and hear beautiful music and fantastic voices and stories that are told. They also may not know what they want until you give it to them. So there's really no excuse for anyone at the head of these corporations, these conservatories, these opera companies, to diverse the work that is presented on stage. You see diversity in the orchestra pit because those auditions are blind. You don't always see it in the person who's conducting the opera, and you rarely ever see behind the scenes who's actually putting the work on stage. Now, what has happened so wonderfully is that you are seeing artists of colors being hired everywhere. There has been this discovery that we can sing. We know how to sing. Black people know how to sing. And that's come up, more than like 15 years now, that we have been casting for great singers, regardless of what the role entails, who it was written for. Because European opera was certainly not written with artists of color in mind. So while there has been wonderful advancement and great strides throughout the world of opera, throughout the world of theater, I mention theater again whenever I mention opera, because I'm fortunate enough to do both and go back and forth on both. There's still work to be done. I applaud, and not because I'm now a member of Manhattan School of Music, but I don't know of any other company or conservatory that has this initiative that no matter what goes on stage in that building, opera, jazz, dance, symphony, arias, it must contain something of the African-American community for this whole semester, and it's probably going to continue next semester. And we've been bringing in panelists and experts and artists to speak on the role of Black people and their influences in the world of opera. And it's extraordinary. So in other words, if we're putting on, this year I've decided in senior opera theater and in grad opera theater, that we will not do any full productions that involve costumes, scenery, makeup, wigs, crew, designers, that we will do scenes from operas and arias. And with all of that, we have to contain something that it could be a dance, a Black dancer who comes on stage. It could be an excerpt from a Scott Joplin opera, or it could be a poem by Langston Hughes. There's one class that's doing all of their opera around the works of Langston Hughes. So it's exciting, and it's a discovery for so many people. And I'm happy about all of that, but yet, it took whatever happened earlier in 2020 to get us all thinking in this way.
Wayne Brown, I turn to you. I've certainly watched you over the last 7 years come in and really beautifully affect an organization, some of its structures. Can you talk a bit about the work you've been doing at MOT that talks about breaking down some of these old structures as we achieve DE&I?
Well, thank you, Arthur. And let me also express on behalf of Michigan Opera Theater my appreciation to both Alexa and Tazewell for joining us today for today's session. Change is constant, and otherwise we become less relevant, obsolete, stuck in time. So I consider the role that I play as a caretaker for now, for whatever the duration of my role with Michigan Opera will be, as focused on seeing how we can continue to try and make a difference in our community by constantly reaffirming those principles to which our founder, David D. Chiara, committed himself in creating an opera company in 1971, and subsequently a focus as a dance presenter by creating exceptional experiences for both artists and audiences in which they can see themselves prominently featured on stage, on and off. One should take note that MOT was founded by David D. Chiara 4 years following the race riots in Detroit. His goal was to establish a company in the heart of the city where Detroit performers on stage with whom they could identify. From my perspective, this has been an ongoing process, and it will continue as Tazewell has indicated. And it's the kind of issue that we have to be mindful that there may be internal or external factors which trigger us to kind of reaffirm, to declare, to take note of where we stand within a community and in a given conversation. And certainly this past year has brought about more self-awareness by whether or not it's performing arts, whether it's education, whether it's corporate sector, more so than any other time in recent years. So I believe that Michigan Opera Theater is no exception. Within the past year, even though diversity of casting and inclusion has been part of our DNA from day one. At the same time, it requires us to say, are we doing enough? Are we paying attention? What have we overlooked? Where are we not making a difference? And believe me, we have found areas where we're not making sufficient progress. And so our board has affirmed the steps have taken in the past, but have committed that the organization will do even more to make sure that we reflect the community where we live, where we work, where we play, and that all aspects of our work are reflected in a much more inclusive and committed role to make sure that we don't create barriers unintentionally, and to make sure that there's a welcoming experience for those who interplay with our organization.
You know, Alexa, you had mentioned when you came into Manhattan School, instead of them just hiring a diversity, head of diversity, they kind of went internal and started the Cultural Inclusion Initiative. So when you got there to start this or work on this particular initiative, what structures, if any, were in place that were actually working well? And were there things that now you have said, okay, this is working fine, this may be either improving this, or maybe let's add this or that to this particular initiative?
I think some of the things that were going well were the community that we had at the school. So I hired a company to do a community-wide survey to sort of assess like how welcome do people feel in the space and in different spaces in the school. And we included students, faculty, staff, but also cafeteria employees, security staff. I mean, the students, they know the security staff better than their teachers sometimes, right? Because they see them 2-3 times a day. The security staff ask them, about their parents or their brother and sister, the janitorial staff, everyone that makes your experience at the school. When I came back to the school, the manager of the cafeteria remembered me, remembered how I liked my eggs, so it's all a part of your community. And overwhelmingly, almost all of the students said that they felt welcome at the school and that the schools cared about them. That doesn't happen by accident. There are things that are legacy relationships that the school has and the way they treat their students, the way people engage with each other. So that's a great place to start work. I think the things that can be changed the quickest are typically repertoire, which is part of the reason we decided, all right, let's make a big statement that everyone that performs this year will have that inclusion that Taz talked about on the stage. That can happen relatively quickly. Some other things take time. So curriculum takes time. And I think, in opera houses, what I think is taking a lot more time is, again, what Taz was talking about, what happens off stage? What does the administration look like? What does the design team look like? That is a little slower than I think most of us want it to be. And I think making those hires at a place where we can see them that are visible, and not just the general managers, but there's other senior roles where there's nobody at most of these opera houses that are going to look like me if I'm showing up to sing.
Tazewell, you mentioned earlier, you often in your career would end up being the first, African-American director of this, or the first to do this or that. When you would come back to those places, did you opening the door, did that open the door? And all of a sudden now people, when you maybe would come back to that company, maybe they now had a history of maybe being more diverse, maybe hiring other directors like yourself, or would you find that door slamming after you had walked through it?
Found the doors not quite slammed and hard to pry open. I found them just opened a little bit that I could slither in if I wanted to. But there was an invisible hand that said, okay, maybe you, but that's enough. And that's true. And I also need to say, and this is rather shocking, but maybe not to the four of us at this meeting, I have been in opera houses where I have rehearsed, And a couple of days would go by and I'd show up for rehearsal, and I was not let into the rehearsal until I showed my passport, a passport. And I said, I'm working here. I'm directing here. Well, we don't know you. And I said, well, my name is such and such. Yeah, but I said, you probably have it written down somewhere. And they did. They said, but what, you could have made up that name, made up Tazewell Thompson. I'm not kidding. This is true. And it's happened at more than one opera house where I have been delayed until the stage manager or somebody comes down, because I wasn't going to show my passport and I wasn't going to show, birth certificate or whatever. So there is that. It still goes on. And it has happened to me once at a very prominent opera house where I was coming back for the third time. I won't mention that opera house. So there is some change, but when I return, you don't really see it. Also, what remains, and it's unfortunate, is that I'm constantly having to prove myself that I indeed should be in the room, not only in the room, but be in charge of the room, be in charge of the 30 singers in the room, be in charge of the stage management table. And along with my co-partner or co-pilot, the conductor, the musical director. I have been in situations where I have given notes and I said something. I said, oh, you don't seem to be writing anything down. And the reply was, well, this is not your culture. What would you know about this opera? Now, I went to management about it because even the way she said it wasn't the way I said it. And that person should have been fired, and it was not. So there is this kind of diversity and understanding about how things like that affect a person. I think probably some women directors have gotten this, I don't know, but it has come up to me, and I don't have many other colleagues who, like me, are directing opera all over the place, and with theater, or writing opera. So I'm kind of on my own, but I do remember that I was called back to a company to talk about exactly what the issues you're bringing up today. And so this theater was serious about it because one of the incidents that happened to me happened to a couple of the other singers when they were prevented from going to their dressing room to get ready for a performance. So they were serious. They brought in the board, they brought in funders, they brought in the staff, and it was a 2-day long session. They were serious. And they have made tremendous changes. So I applaud them. They were serious. They knew they were wrong. It took the incidents that went on earlier of 2020 to get them into that place, but nonetheless, they're doing it. I would imagine, as I look around and I read Opera America News and I see what's going on, and there are panel discussions, and there seems to be a wokeness that's going on, a tumult that has shaken the foundations, and I think that's great. And if they come to that and they mean it and they move on and they do something, I think it's wonderful. And I don't think it should be a ragtag hiring of get that person of color, bring her off the street, see what he knows. No, it should be, there are many of us who have been trained, who've come out of conservatories, who come out of wonderful business schools, who have experiences in the corporate world, who could be on the boards. There are those who could be a part of an administration, who could be part of the planning process, who could work in development, who could work in marketing, who could work in designers. They should be introduced and allowed to meet the persons who make the decisions at all these opera houses. So the work is getting better. The work in terms of diversity in all of these houses across the country, there's still work to be done.
Tazewell, I want to, excuse me, Arthur, I want to comment on something you just described, and that is an experience that you found yourself where you were not accorded the respect, dignity, and accommodation to which you should have been. When things of that nature occur, I wish that more of our artists who have those experiences say something. I was on a panel several months ago And I learned it's about an opera company that shall remain, we will not identify. But it was a similar situation relative to a reception that had taken place following a performance where the artist was the principal performer, and at the reception was not treated very nicely, and it was hardly welcome to the reception. So these are cultural issues, and they must be tackled immediately. And any time that occurs, I think it's responsibility to make sure that whoever is running the company is mindful of those slight insults, because that's no way, no matter how much hiring we do, if we're not committed to modifying the culture, then it just doesn't go far enough. So as I want to make sure that we are mindful about our hiring practices, our welcoming goals, I also want us to make sure that we're paying attention to the culture of our institutions, because ultimately that's where the lasting role effect, not only in terms of what happens on stage, but what happens behind stage, what happens after the performance is over.
You're so right. And it's, no one can really describe the pain, embarrassment, humiliation that you feel. And it doesn't go away with a glass of wine at the reception. It stays with you for some time. It's very hurtful. It's painful. And Eric Owens and I, we were attending something at the end of a performance. No, actually, we were going to a gala where he was going to be one of the featured singers, and I was going to make some remarks, et cetera, et cetera. They would not let us in. And so we had to go around the other way to come in because the stagehands or whatever, they knew who we were. And, he and I were both ready to just go home, and it's, no, we can't do that. And then we didn't want to bring it up that evening to upset anybody, but eventually we reported it. It's you're right, the culture needs to be changed throughout the entire organization, from the person who greets you at the artist entrance, who are on the floors, working in various departments, to the janitors, to the ushers, everybody, because for a long time, people were just not used to seeing persons of color, not just in the audience, but, actually belonging in the theater and having a central control over things, making those decisions.
I wanted to piggyback on something you said, Tazewell. You talked about having to change the culture top down. And I'm wondering, for the three of you, what is it like? I'm sure Alexa at MSM, every single person hasn't necessarily been bought in to the inclusion initiative. How do you change minds and hearts in a culture where, you alone don't have the sole propriety over this issue?
One thing that happens a lot that people say to me is, well, it shouldn't have to be your job to, and I say very clearly, I raised my hand and said I would like to take on this work because it's my alma mater. It's a community that means a great deal to me. And it's not, as chief of staff and AVP, it's not the only thing I do either. But I think it's important to understand that some people do want to take on the work and learn how to change those hearts and minds. And the other piece of the how do you do it thing is I literally go to every department. I sit with the faculty. I spend an hour at a time. I'm in Zooms on this topic, 10 or 12 times a week sometimes. And it is habitual at the school. And I see the breakthroughs happening because we are getting really used to the discussion. So sometimes it's a large faculty group. Sometimes it's by department, by discipline, because every discipline has their own sort of complicated history. I bring in outside people. We had a discussion for the whole opera department this week with Chip McNeil from San Francisco and Yvette Loinas at St. Louis, and a lot of different folks to get a bigger industry perspective without the objective of telling you what the right thing and the wrong thing is to do. The objective is to have the conversation and to practice the way we get in the practice room with the rigor and discipline there, to use that same principle in discussion. And I believe that that helps our students to be better artists, to create more interesting, better art. Because if you're focused on the page, as many students who come to conservatory are, the page and the technique, are you an artist? Like, I'm not, you're a really great interpreter and technician, and you're virtuosic, but what do you have to say? And us getting into the discussion spaces, I think, replace traditional training. I think they get people to feel what it feels like for many of us that walk around uncomfortable a lot in our life.
Wayne Brown, let me ask you this question. When you're looking at an organization like MOT, where you're making DEI, those issues, of value for the company, what happens when someone comes to you and says, it seems like this DEI stuff is more tokenism or more affirmative action? How do you work around those issues, or people who might have that mindset?
Well, I can say that since I've been in Detroit, no one has dared to approach me on that basis. So therefore, it's not an experience that has revealed itself. And I believe that we have a responsibility to be clear as to what we stand for, what our goals are. And in this case of the past year, when all of us are called to affirm our positions, I think that's what we need to do throughout our organizations, make sure that we are walking the walk, and that it's not just something we're declaring, but we're exercising, we're practicing, we're observing, we're intentional.
Tazewell, as you in your work, you have a very interesting foot. You have a sort of a foot in academia, and you're also a producer as well. So I'm just wondering, does your work, would you say in academia, does that feed into your work, as a producer when you're on the stage of these different companies?
Yes, it does. I feel that I feel that my spine, not necessarily completely all my heart, but my spine is in education. I've always wanted to teach. And that comes from my childhood. I grew up for about 8 years in a convent, and it was the convent of St. Dominic's, run by Dominican nuns, which is famous for progressive teaching. So the idea and the respect of imparting what you know to young minds and growing children was ingrained in me. I didn't realize how much until many years later. But when I was 8 and 9 years old, I started to, learn how to read music and learn Latin. I was an altar boy. And Sister Benvenuta would bring every Tuesday and Thursday for those 7 years records on her metal trolley, and it was all opera. So before I knew about Negro spirituals or gospel or rhythm and blues or jazz, it was opera, and it was the world of opera.
So I want to go back to Alexa if I could. Alexa, we're talking about your work in academia. How does that specific work then relate to what Tazewell is doing and, say, Wayne at the opera companies?
I can say, from having, again, gone to the school, it is a really special time in your development as an artist and a performer. So when you leave here, you're preparing to go and work at big houses, little houses, any house that will take you. And what I think is really important is, especially, we're in a pandemic, we're going to be coming out of that, where work is still going to be hard. It's going to take us some time to get restarted. But I think the students are now thinking more creatively about what they'll do with their time after this. But I think more critically, I hope that they will start asking more questions, because I can tell you, when I was in school and I was singing the letter aria from Baby Doe, every feedback I got in a coaching was, this is a great aria for you, but you probably wouldn't be cast. So maybe we should go back to Susanna for you. And at the time I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. they know best. You know, I'm at MSM and they're just being honest, and I can take it. I'm tough. I can, you know, and I hope that if a student hears that today or after they leave the school, that if an agent says to them, well, let's think about something more castable, that they're like, hold the phone. I actually sing this really well. I love this character. And if you're not willing to support me in doing it, then I'll find someone who will. Because I think having that self-possession, I mean, I wish I had that. I tell a story all the time that when I was here, I did the Harlem Opera competition where you have to sing not only spirituals and arias, but art songs by Black composers. So I went to a teacher, my teacher, and she didn't have any suggestions. So I went to, you know, my lit classes, and it was like, oh, let me get back to you. And finally, I went to, I think, the chair of the department, who said, you know, maybe you want to ask Hilda Harris. You know, all this time I'm thinking, Black people just must not write art songs, or they're not good, you know. And searching through a library where you're like, I don't even know where to look. I don't know any names to even look for, let alone something that would be good for my personality, for my instrument. And I went to Hilda and she was like, girl, I got you. Come here. Let me give you these 5, listen to them, see what you think. If you need more, let me know. And I found amazing songs. I mean, I found the Florence Price, Langston Hughes songs, and they were wonderful, like great for my voice, great for me. Once I left school and I got out into the world, I thought, wow, that's a really hurtful experience. To think that not only did that music exist, but no one knew about it to suggest to me, but also walking around for weeks thinking that people that look like me aren't sophisticated enough to write good music, or we would know about it at MSM. So for me, I think about when a student comes and asks for things now, I feel like the faculty drop everything to find something for the students, because I don't think they're getting a complete education. If that's an experience that can still happen now. So.
Tazewell, can I turn back to you? As the industry forges ahead with the goal of inviting, you know, more diverse voices and stories around the table and on the stage, and while we're reevaluating and reinterpreting the place of some of our more traditional works, what do you think America will look like, operatically speaking, in 10 years?
Oh, it's hard to say. I'm thinking, and I'm an optimist. You know, as many times as, you know, we've been battered around and slapped around and pushed down and doors closed, I remain optimistic. I think we're going to have a little bit of a pushback for maybe a year or two, hopefully not longer, you know, and I don't know how it is, you know, in terms of seasons. I think the pandemic is hurting us a great deal, all of us in all the industry. Some opera houses may not even open or have a season. I know that donors and foundations have walked away from some. Artists are dying to get on stage and sing. Musicians, I mean, when you think about it, there's just thousands and thousands of us out there. So that's going to take some time. In terms of what, once that is all over, what will we look like? I am hoping that we've learned some lessons. And the lessons that I'm hoping that we've learned is lessons of tolerance, of understanding, of trying to step into the shoes of a culture not your own, of having a perspective that you've not had before, that your eyes have been rinsed, and that you now see with a clearer vision that as you step outside of your world, your domain, your home, that you're comfortable sitting in a theater next to someone that does not look like you. And you're more than comfortable with seeing singers on stage who may be singing Baby Doe, who may be singing Giovanni, who may be singing, oh, you name it. Suddenly I can't think of opera, but Dido, Aeneas, you know, all, not just Porgy and Bess, which I love, but that there are other things, that other opportunities for us all to be on stage, to be in the pit, to be leading the orchestra, to be running the organization. I'm really hoping, and I have to live in this hope, otherwise it'd be very depressing, that we'll see a very different landscape of color throughout the opera world. We all have to play that role. And we, the four of us here, are called on to play it probably more than others. Alexa is doing wonderful work at the school. And I know, I mean, you know, that Wayne Brown still has his head up at Michigan Opera Theater gives me great hope, because he had just gotten there a couple of seasons before I arrived. And I can feel the change. I sense the change. But there needs to be more organizations that are learning from MSM, from Glimmerglass Opera, I need to say. She's done tremendous work there, Francesca Zambello, yes. And at Washington National Opera as well. And she speaks very highly of you, Wayne Brown, by the way. But there needs to be more of that throughout the organization, and there isn't yet. In 10 years, I think yes, I'm hopeful. I have to live on that hope, that there's more than just the four of us at this meeting.
Gotcha. Wayne Brown, want to care to crystal ball gaze for us 10 years?
Well, first of all, Tazewell, I sense an opera in the works coming from you in what you've just described. And
I'm ready.
And look forward to seeing how that unfolds.
I'm ready. I'm ready for a new commission. I have a couple of ideas.
No, this is an issue that is, in my view, is much more locally focused. And in my view, this is where answers will derive. It comes out of what is the experience of a company and the community, how the two are aligned, and so forth. So for me, right now, my focus is on Detroit. The opera art form need not be confined to the opera house, but can coexist within and without. I believe that local architecture embraces and celebrates the distinctive traits of our communities, and those who leverage that which the community holds dear and design performances, experiences on multiple platforms. So I think the whole notion of the festival world is likely to play a key area as we see this art form find its way in terms of that next phase. Let's face it, early years, opera was part of a festival experience. And I see us perhaps not only observing significant work within the opera house, but throughout the community. And I think that's where I would like to think that our companies, at least the company in Detroit, through the lens of our new artistic director, Yval Sharon, I expect that we want to see how the opera reflects the spirit of Detroit. The spirit of Detroit is a kind of theme for the city. And I would like to think that the opera company can play a key role in conveying that spirit.
Okay. Alexa Smith, want to give us your 10-year prediction?
Sure. Well, as someone who hopes to run a company one day, I'm just going to put it out into the world that in 10 years, I'll be ready for you. But I love both.
Come to Detroit, Lexa.
All right. I love both the visions that Wayne and Taz described. And I think a lot about, as an opera person, what does that even mean to be opera? Because, it's typically, your first thought is that really narrow time, between the mid 1700s and early 1900s. And there's so much more available to be a part of that tapestry. And I think, I live in Harlem, and I'm telling you, I see opera all around me in Harlem, high drama, depth of sound. And I was talking to Will Liverman at the Sphinx conference 2 weeks ago, and he has a new opera about the barbershop experience, like the Black barbershop, and using his voice, his operatic talents. And I was so moved by it, because talk about an operatic experience in Harlem, going to the barbershop. And I think rather than trying to force our audiences into helping them understand like what's happening in Aida, which for me as a young person, it resonated with me. It hit me and I welcomed it. If there is another broader way to think about like what opera is, I could see all the little boys on my block loving Factotum, loving that barbershop opera, and seeing a place for themselves there, either on stage or just in the audience when that show pops up here and there. But community is key. I grew up in Louisville, as Wayne knows, and that is a community that supports the arts and culture really generously. And I got to go to a lot of free things as a kid that my parents just couldn't have afforded otherwise. And you never know, like, I think it's a miracle sometimes as a Black kid from Kentucky that I got to go to MSM and sing around the country, because I have all of it stacked against me. But every time we create an opportunity for community to play a role in the arts, we're gonna get those people that come through and stay committed to it. And it shouldn't be a miracle. It should just be an opportunity that happens like Little League happens or soccer camp happens. But I think building those opportunities, and Detroit's a different community than Louisville, and Wayne, I'm sure, had to adapt to what that community needs. All of those things are really important, but I'll be here in 10 years. I'm in business school now, so I'm getting really good at Excel. So I'll be ready. I'll be ready to lead us all. Don't worry.
Fantastic. Tazewell, what drives and sustains you as a change maker in the arts?
Curiosity, passion for storytelling. I like being in a room with artists. And I like to feel that my legacy will be one day that I contributed something that affected change in one way or another.
Fantastic. Alexa, would you say?
I feel like passion for me was always hard to pin down because I loved being a part of the industry in any way. Like I loved when I was running City Opera's Instagram account while I was in the chorus. But I think that the thing that makes me feel like most colored in, like I color a lot with my toddler. The thing that makes me feel most colored in is seeing the students that I work with get the confidence to keep going. Because as we all know, we go through those phases where we feel like quitting. And every time you can affect that thing that helps them just keep going. Next audition, sign up. Yes, you didn't get that job. Next thing. That little thing, when I get down myself, I think about like those little moments. And it keeps me going because we're getting the next generation every single time. Every single commencement, we're getting new students. And that's exciting that it still keeps going.
Wayne Brown, what drives and sustains you?
Well, I see my charge as maintaining a constant view of what lies ahead, remaining mindful of how our organization is perceived, remaining in touch with our artists, audiences, and taking note of community perceptions. Through the recent appointment of our artistic director, MOT has pressed the reset button for what opera in Detroit can mean. I invite all of you to stay tuned.
Wonderful. Well, Alexa Smith, Tazewell Thompson, and Wayne Brown, thank you. You dropped some pearls of wisdom on us today. Thank you so much for being here.